We're gonna start making some bread. I'm using the Anchorwork M650 microphone for this. So we're gonna make just plain bread. What you're gonna need to start with is 2 cups of water that's between 95 and 105 degrees Fahrenheit, or roughly about 35 degrees Celsius. And to that, you're going to add 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast. Or essentially 1 packet, right? One of the little square packets. Now this is instant yeast. You can use active dry yeast as well. For instant yeast, if you're gonna do this, if you're in a rush, you don't really need to do this step, but for active dry, you must do this step. So with 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast in there, you're then just going to stir it up, just like this. Get all that yeast nice and wet. Try and get it off the spoon as much as possible. And then you're just gonna let that sit for a total of 10 minutes. All right, so 10 minutes. So that's gonna be put aside. And then, so that's 2 of the ingredients done. I'm gonna put this back in the fridge where it lives. Now, in a bowl, you're gonna take plain all-purpose flour. Okay, for that you'll need 4 cups worth of flour. Now, this specific flour here is King Arthur all-purpose. It runs at 11.7% protein. The recipe says normal all-purpose flour is fine. I prefer this for this brand for when I'm making bread, because it gets closer to bread flour. You know, if you can get 11.7%, go for it. Most all-purpose flours in the States are between, that's not enough, 9.5 and 10.5% protein. Okay, you could use bread flour if you need to. I've done it with this recipe several times, but just 4 cups of flour. All right, just like that. Okay, don't put the flour away yet, because you'll need it later on in the morning. But just keep that aside. And then you're also going to do 1.5 teaspoons of salt. This is kosher salt. That's what we have. That's what we use. You know, whatever salt you have is fine. Try not to use like sea salt, like full sea salt. You're gonna want it easily dissolvable. So yeah. And then from there, you'll take a decent sturdy spoon. This is just a standard wooden spoon. And you're going to stir that salt into the flour just to incorporate it evenly. Okay, and then you're going to make a nice big well in the middle, just like that. All right, and that's your 4 ingredients prepped for the bread. That's all you need is flour, water, salt, and yeast. Ready to go, and we'll be back in almost 8 minutes. So, okay, that's been 10 minutes. This stuff is ready to go. So what you're gonna do now is you've still got your well in the bowl there. You're gonna take very clean hands. So make sure your hands are washed and clean before you do this bit. Okay, I just did. So you're gonna pour this directly into the hole, to your well. Scrape out all the stuff. If you've got some stuff stuck to the spoon, it's probably a good idea to do that too. Or, you know, take the spoon out beforehand. So then you're going to now start incorporating all of the flour into the liquid. All right, so there's gonna be a point where this will stop and it won't be workable, but this will show you when that gets to it. But you're gonna do as much as you can in this. Try to make sure you get everything off the sides so you don't miss out on any of that flour. All right, so you can see this is mostly done already. What you're gonna do now, okay, is you're gonna take extremely wet hands. Go up your arm a little bit, okay? I'm just leaving the tap running so I can come back to it in a second, but you're gonna use your hand to scrape everything off. And yes, you are gonna get stuff on your hands, which is fine. I'm gonna re-wet that. What you're gonna do now is you're gonna get into the bowl and you're gonna squeeze it between your thumb and forefinger like that, like this. And that's going to help incorporate it. Move it around a bit every now and again, but you're going to essentially move your hand down the piece and sort of squeeze it together. It's going to help incorporate that liquid and flour until you get all of that dry stuff done and you get a shaggy wet mess just like that. Okay, let me just wash that off. So that's done. So now what you're going to do with that wet mess is you're going to cover it. I'm using a lid because cats eat through plastic, and we're going to set that aside for 30 minutes. Okay, now I'm putting this in the oven because you want it at room temperature. My oven's been on for about a minute to 90 seconds, so it's got a temperature up. The house is too cold at the moment to really help with bread, but in 30 minutes we're going to come back and we're going to get the first strength building fold on the bread. Okay, I'll see you in 30 minutes. All right, so that's been 30 minutes and you can see it's done quite a bit of rising and sort of like glooping out. So what we're going to do is we're going to again take wet hands, very, very wet hands. And I'm leaving that running and you'll see why in a moment. So you're going to put down at the top of, like the top of your bowl, you're going to grab a piece of dough and then you're going to stretch it out and back over the top. Turn it 90 degrees, do it again. Try to do, you're going to pull it out until it just before it breaks. And you'll feel that. And you're going to go around that, do that twice fully around, so 8 times total. So pull it up, fold it over, turn it around, pull it up, fold it over, turn it around, pull it up, turn it over, fold it around. Last one, up, over, and done. So now I'm wetting my hands again because they're still pretty wet. Pretty wet. And this is called slapping and folding. So you're going to put your hands at the top and the bottom of the bowl and you're going to pick it up. Try to get the dough without the bowl. Let me try that again. Try that again. Okay, so the dough, so you're going to hold it like this. You're then going to slap it down and fold it over the top. Take your hands out, do it again. So down like that. Okay, so up and down. And you're essentially getting tension on the bowl now, so that you get it nice and tight. And then you're going to roll it to try into like a little ball, like that, using the side of the bowl to help you with tension. All right, just like that. And then we're going to put the lid back on, and it's going to go back in for another 30 minutes. Okay. And then you're going to do the exact same thing again. So you're going to stretch it over the top 8 times and then slap and fold it till it's in a bowl. Then you can put it back in the bowl and you're going to leave it for an hour. Okay, so one more 30 minutes, stretch, slap and fold it, and then put it into a bowl, cover it, put it back in the oven or on the counter, and you're going to leave it for an hour then. Okay, and we'll see you after an hour and a half. All right, so it's been an hour and a half now since the last video, but it's been an hour since I last touched it, and you can see the dough has risen really well, almost very well. So what we're going to do now is essentially pull it out onto the counter, which is going to knock it down at the same time. You can use a dough scraper for this, or a bowl scraper. I don't really bother usually because I'm going to get my hands in it anyway. So you're going to put it on a lightly floured work surface, and you're going to put a little bit more on the top of the item itself. Not too much, you don't want it there. Now, I'm going to cut it in half because I'm making 2 loaves. If you're making one big loaf, you don't need to worry about this. I'm just going to put that bit aside. So I've got my half here. What I'm going to do is essentially knock it out, just try and stretch it out. All right, and then I'm going to fold it in on itself. So taking one corner, pulling it to the middle, the other corner into the middle, take the bottom into the middle, the other side into the middle. And then I'm going to flip it over and just tuck the edges under it just to get it into a rough round shape. And then I'm going to put that aside for a second. If you see any big bubbles like that, just pop them and let them go. I'm going to do the same with this one. So like I did before, tamp it out, stretch the top into the middle, side into the middle, side into the middle, bottom into the middle. Doesn't matter what order, just as long as you're doing all 4 corners. And again, then I'm just shaping it to tuck the bottom into like a little ball like that. Okay, they're not exactly even, but it doesn't really matter. So now, if you're making a large bowl, like one round loaf, you would take this to shape it like that, to shape it into one big round. I'm making batards, so you can see here what I have is a lined banneton basket, floured. Okay, and you can, these are about $8 for a pair on Amazon, and it's about the same for a round one. Make sure you well line it. If you don't have one of these, you can just use a bowl with a tea towel, a clean tea towel, and really heavily flour it. So what I'm going to do to make this round shape into the log is I'm going to press it out into and stretch it out into a rough rectangle, kind of like that. Okay. Now with a little bit of flour on the top, I'm then going to take the top part and start to roll it down. Each time I roll it over itself by about half an inch, I'm going to really push down on that seam to seal it, okay, the whole way along. So then every time I move it down, I'm sealing that seam, and you're going to keep going, pushing that air out of the seam until you get to the bottom, and then just roll it on that. I'm going to tuck the ends under a little bit, and then you're going to put it seam side up in the basket. So if you're doing a round, you would still roll it until you get a dome shape, but then you would still put it seam side up. Okay, so I'll do this next one. Make sure I got some flour there, put it out. Again, stretch it out until I get like a rough rectangle. And then I'm going to flip it over and seal. Roll it down and seal, just like that. Roll it down and seal. Again, another roll. And then last one is going to be just like that. Tuck it under a little bit. Give it a bit of a... Okay, and then seam side up in the basket. Okay, so some people like to flour the top. I don't really worry about it because I've got an oiled lid, and I'm going to put it on top like that. The second one, I'm going to use plastic because I only have one lid. And this plastic has been oiled as well. And I'm going to put these aside for 45 minutes. Now, if you're making a single loaf, you don't need to worry about this, but obviously if you're making two and you only have one Dutch oven like this thing, you would transfer one of the loaves to the fridge after 25 minutes. Okay, now the oven I'm setting to 450. And then I'm going to put this Dutch oven into the oven on the obviously on the lower shelf that it will fit in, because it is quite large. And you're going to let this sit in the oven and the oven to come to temperature for that 45 minutes. Okay, so it's been 45 minutes and this is hot now, so we're just going to be careful with a nice big hot pot. I'm just going to put some light on. All right. So as you can see over here, this one has risen nicely, filling the basket. So we've got the lid off, and we're going to use this thing. This is called a lame, or it's probably pronounced wrong, but it's essentially a very thin razor blade. If you don't have that, we can use a pair of scissors. But we're going to put this in directly into the pot, exactly like that. And then we're going to take the lame and we're going to cut it the full length of the bread, and we're going to put the lid back on, and then it's going to go straight into the oven while it's still hot. Now for my batards, they're going to cook probably about 35 minutes. You're going to have 20 minutes with the lid on, 15 minutes with the lid off. For a round, you're going to do 45 minutes total, so half an hour with the lid on, 15 with it off. Now, if you don't have one of these, which you probably don't, a very good pair of kitchen shears will work as well, and you'll just snip into the bread like that, right? It's going to allow the steam to come out and for the item to open up. But that's pretty much it, and we'll see you in 20 minutes. All right, so that's been 20 minutes. And we're just gonna take the lid off. You can see how much that's already started to rise. And then we're gonna put this back in the oven uncovered for 15 more minutes. All right, so that bread is done. Pull this out. Take this out of there. So I'm going to put that directly on the rack. Now, if you're doing the small batards like I am, you're going to put that Dutch oven back in the oven with the lid on for about 10 minutes or so, just to get the lid nice and hot. Now, let's take a look at this bread for a minute. So as you can see with the bread, the cut we made has opened up and formed an ear, sadly on both sides, which means it didn't cut it right. But you want to let this fully cool down on a wire rack until it's stone cold, at least 2 hours before cutting it, because otherwise the inside structure is just going to give way with your knife. But that's how to make bread.